Have you ever wondered why the most savage motorcycles in cinema history were hiding secrets more chaotic than the Wasteland itself? What if Mad Max's iconic bikes were built on lies, luck, and decisions so bizarre that even the franchise's most devoted fans never suspected? These are 20 weird facts about Mad Max's Wasteland motorcycles that will completely blow your mind. Number 20, the original. Mad Max bikes were sourced from a police auction. The motorcycles appearing in the original Mad Max production were not purpose-built film vehicles. Director George Miller and producer Byron Kennedy sourced the majority of the bike fleet through a Victorian police vehicle auction held in Melbourne during 1978. The auction offered decommissioned police Kawasaki Zilla 900s at prices the production's extremely limited budget could actually accommodate. Miller had originally envisioned a fleet of heavily customized machines, but quickly discovered that customization costs were incompatible with what Kennedy had available. The police auction bikes arrived in varying mechanical condition, requiring the transportation team to assess each unit individually and prioritize restoration work according to filming requirements. Several units were too deteriorated for riding sequences and were stripped for parts to keep the functional bikes operational. The irony of a film about renegade police using actual former police motorcycles was not lost on the crew. Nobody in the production ever publicly highlighted the connection. Number 19. The Knight Rider's Pursuit Special was nearly a motorcycle, not a car.
And that's allowed me to be incredibly vulnerable within it.
The vehicle associated with the Knight Rider character in the original Mad Max almost became a motorcycle rather than the modified Ford Falcon that audiences know. Early production documents show George Miller developing a concept in which the opening pursuit sequence featured a motorcycle-mounted Knight Rider, whose escalating recklessness would establish the film's anarchic tone through two-wheeled rather than four-wheeled chaos. The concept was abandoned after practical testing revealed that the specific camera angles Miller wanted for the pursuit were significantly more achievable with a car than with a motorcycle at the speeds the sequence required. The motorcycle concept left a legacy, however. Several elements originally designed for the motorcycle version of the character were redistributed into the main force patrol biker sequences that appeared later in the film. The Knight Rider's original motorcycle design documentation survived in Miller's production archive and was referenced during early development conversations for subsequent franchise entries. Number 18. The Toecutter Gang. Bikes were customized by a builder with no film experience. The distinctive Harley-Davidson and British motorcycle combination, ridden by the Toecutter Gang throughout the original Mad Max, was customized by a Melbourne-based builder who had never previously worked on a film production. His selection came through a personal recommendation to producer Byron Kennedy from within the Australian custom motorcycle community, rather than through any formal procurement process. The builder's civilian customization work had attracted attention in specialist circles, but had no connection to the film industry. His lack of production experience created immediate practical problems. His initial builds prioritized visual impact over the mechanical reliability and repeatability that filming demands. Several of his designs required significant reworking by the production's transportation team before they could be trusted for repeated stunt use. Despite these complications, the finished bikes carried an authentic menace that Miller felt could not have been achieved by a builder more familiar with Hollywood conventions. His outsider perspective produced something genuinely threatening rather than cinematically approximate. Number 17. Mad Max 2's bike fleet was partially assembled from wrecked machines. The expanded motorcycle presence in Mad Max 2 required a fleet that the production's budget could not support through conventional sourcing, Production designer Graham Walker developed a solution that simultaneously addressed the budget constraint and strengthened the film's post-apocalyptic visual language. A significant portion of the Mad Max 2 bike fleet was assembled from genuinely wrecked motorcycles sourced from insurance salvage yards across New South Wales. These were real accident-damaged machines that the production's fabrication team cut, welded, and combined into functioning hybrids that no manufacturer would recognize as descending from their original products. The wrecked source material gave the finished bikes an authenticity of damage and distress that purpose-built props could never have replicated convincingly. Several bikes were constructed from components sourced from 3 or 4 separate wrecked machines, making their mechanical lineage genuinely untraceable. Walker later described this approach as accidentally discovering the perfect production design philosophy for a world built entirely from salvage. Number 16. Thatnanjki Road. Gang's bikes burned during the tanker chase. The extended tanker pursuit sequence in Mad Max 2 required the motorcycle fleet to operate continuously across multiple filming days in the New South Wales outback under extreme summer temperatures. The bikes were running on real fuel throughout, a decision that created a logistical supply challenge the production had significantly underestimated during planning. The remote filming location outside Broken Hill required fuel to be transported by road from the nearest substantial supply point. The consumption rate of the combined bike fleet operating repeatedly across the chase sequence's demanding requirements exceeded the production's initial fuel allocation within the first 2 filming days. An emergency resupply was organized that consumed a meaningful portion of the second unit's contingency budget. The transportation coordinator later calculated that the tanker chase sequence burned more fuel in the support and picture vehicle fleet than the production had allocated for the entire location block. The fuel cost alone for those filming days represented a significant percentage of the bike's total production budget. Number 15. A stunt rider was hospitalized after a sequence that appears completely controlled on screen. Two motorcycle sequences that appear most technically controlled in the finished film. One specific shot conceals a stunt outcome that required immediate medical intervention. The rider involved completed the visible portion of his sequence within the camera frame successfully before losing control during the deceleration phase occurring beyond the camera's sightline. The fall happened in a section of the outback filming location where the surface transitioned from the prepared track surface the sequence had been designed around to unprepared desert ground. The impact sent the rider to the nearest medical facility available to the remote Broken Hill location. He sustained injuries requiring several days of hospital treatment. Production continued during his absence using different riders for sequences that had been scheduled around his involvement. And upon his return, he completed the remaining work assigned to him. The sequence involving his hospitalized fall appears in the finished film as a smooth, unremarkable background moment that draws no particular attention from viewers. Number 14. Fury Road's bike. Designs were developed over 15 years.
It was 40 degrees yesterday and quite hot, and we were filming on the...
Before filming the motorcycle designs appearing in Mad Max, Fury Road did not emerge from a standard pre-production design phase. George Miller had been developing the visual language of Fury Road's vehicle fleet, including its motorcycle components, across a development period spanning approximately 15 years, from the project's initial conception to its eventual production commencement. The bikes underwent multiple complete redesign cycles as the project moved through various stages of attempted production that ultimately fell through before filming finally began in Namibia. Each failed production attempt left behind developed design work that fed into the subsequent cycle. The motorcycles that appear in Fury Road therefore represent the accumulated creative output of 15 years of thinking rather than a conventional pre-production program. Production designer Colin Gibson inherited designs that had been evolving for longer than many of his team members had been working in the film industry. Several design elements visible in the finished vehicles trace directly back to concepts developed during the earliest development phase. Number 13. The Vuvolini motorcycles were built around engines that predated World War II. The motorcycles ridden by the Vuvolini, the many mothers encountered in Mad Max Fury Road's desert sequences, were constructed around genuine pre-World War II era engines that production designer Colin Gibson's team sourced from private collections and motorcycle heritage specialists across Australia. The decision to use period engines was not purely aesthetic. Gibson argued during production design discussions that the Fury Road universe's post-apocalyptic logic demanded vehicles whose mechanical foundations predated the catastrophe, is surviving because their simplicity made them maintainable without modern manufacturing infrastructure. Pre-war engines fitted this narrative logic precisely. Locating sufficient examples in usable condition required a sourcing effort that extended across several months and multiple Australian states. Several engines required sympathetic restoration work before they could be safely operated within the demands of a film production. The finished Vuvolini bikes therefore carry engines old enough to have existed before the Second World War, a detail invisible to audiences but fundamental to Gibson's design philosophy for the character group. Number 12. The Namibian desert. Destroyed bikes at a rate nobody had calculated. When Mad Max Fury Road relocated its principal photography to the Namibian desert, following the collapse of the originally planned Australian production, the Transportation Department's mechanical failure projections for the motorcycle fleet proved dramatically incorrect. The combination of fine Namibian sand, extreme temperature variations between day and night filming sessions, and the physical demands of operating on unprepared desert surface created mechanical attrition rates that exceeded the department's estimates by a factor that the transportation coordinator described in a subsequent interview as deeply embarrassing in retrospect. The sand penetrated sealing systems that had performed adequately during testing in Australian conditions. Temperature cycling caused metal fatigue in components that pre-production stress analysis had cleared. The department's spare parts inventory, calculated as sufficient for the entire Namibian filming block, was exhausted in the first third of the schedule. Emergency procurement from South African suppliers added costs and complications that rippled through the production's already strained logistical framework for the remainder of the desert filming period. Number 11. An original Mad Max bike was discovered being used as a garden ornament. One of the most remarkable vehicle recovery stories connected to the Mad Max franchise involved a motorcycle that had been used in the original 1979 production and was subsequently located by a franchise historian in 2011 being used as a garden ornament outside a residential property in regional Victoria. The bike had passed through several owners after the production concluded, with its film provenance apparently unknown to or disregarded by each successive owner. The final pre-discovery owner had acquired it through a deceased estate sale and, finding it non-operational, had placed it in his garden as a decorative feature without any awareness of its history. The franchise historian identified it through a partially visible component configuration that matched production photographs in his research archive. Negotiations with the owner resulted in a sale at a price reflecting garden ornament value rather than film memorabilia value, as the owner remained skeptical of the provenance claim throughout the transaction. Subsequent authentication confirmed the identification. The bike was restored and is currently held in a private collection, whose owner has declined all subsequent offers. Number 10. The Goose's motorcycle was almost written out of the original script.
they give you a little arresting jolt.
The Kawasaki Z900, ridden by Jim Goose in the original, Mad Max occupied a more marginal position in early script drafts than the finished film suggests. Writer James McCausland's initial screenplay gave Goose significantly less riding screen time, with his motorcycle functioning primarily as a background prop, establishing his character's profession rather than as a narrative element in its own right. Director George Miller expanded Goose's motorcycle presence during production after early rushes demonstrated that the bike's visual relationship with the character was generating stronger audience engagement than the script had anticipated. The expansion required additional filming days that the budget accommodated only by reducing scope elsewhere. The specific Kawasaki assigned to Goose was selected from the police auction fleet because its mechanical condition was the most reliable of the available units, making it suitable for the increased riding sequences Miller was adding. That reliability decision inadvertently gave one of the franchise's most emotionally resonant vehicles its screen presence. Number 9. Fury Road's Warboy bikes were engineered to fall apart controllably. The motorcycles ridden by Immortan Joe's Warboys and Mad Max, Fury Road were built with a structural philosophy that inverted every conventional principle of vehicle construction. Production designer Colin Gibson directed his fabrication team to engineer specific failure points into the bikes that would allow controlled disintegration during crash sequences without generating the dangerous, unpredictable fragmentation that genuine mechanical failure produces. Each Warboy bike contained predetermined breakaway joints at calculated structural positions. When a crash sequence required a bike to come apart dramatically, the rider and stunt coordinator knew precisely which components would separate, in what sequence, and in which direction. This engineering made sequences look catastrophically violent while remaining within manageable safety parameters. Gibson described the philosophy as building things designed to die gracefully rather than chaotically. The fabrication team developed the breakaway joint system across several weeks of pre-production testing, refining the failure characteristics until visual result matched the dramatic requirements without exceeding the safety boundaries the stunt coordinator had established. Number 8. The original film's pursuit bikes had their speedometers removed before filming. Every Kawasaki Z900 deployed as a main force patrol pursuit bike in the original, Mad Max had its speedometer assembly removed before principal photography commenced. The decision originated with director George Miller following a conversation with his stunt coordinator about managing rider behavior during chase sequences. Miller had observed during early rehearsals that riders instinctively monitored their speedometers during high-speed passes, creating a subtle but camera-detectable shift in body position and head angle at the moment of speed checking. Removing the instruments eliminated the behavior entirely. Riders could no longer check their speed, forcing them to maintain consistent body positioning throughout each pass. The secondary benefit was aesthetic. Without the standard instrument cluster, the bike's cockpit area had a cleaner, more aggressive visual profile that Miller preferred. Replacement blanking plates were fabricated to fill the instrument apertures. The modification was so cleanly executed that the absence of instruments is essentially invisible on screen. Yet it fundamentally changed how every chase sequence in the film was physically ridden. Number 7. A Fury Road motorcycle sequence was filmed in reverse and flipped. In post-production among Mad Max Fury Road's motorcycle sequences, one specific shot that appears to show a bike moving at extraordinary forward speed through the Namibian landscape was actually filmed in reverse. The sequence required a particular relationship between the bike, the rider, and the surrounding dust movement that the second unit director could not achieve filming in the conventional direction due to prevailing wind conditions on the day of filming. The wind was moving in a direction that created dust displacement inconsistent with the visual language Miller had established for high-speed sequences elsewhere in the film. Reversing the filming direction placed the wind's natural dust movement in the correct relationship to the bike's apparent travel direction. The reversed footage was then digitally flipped horizontally in post-production to restore the correct screen direction. The flip required removing several background elements that revealed the reversal through their own directional characteristics. The finished shot contains no visible evidence of either the reversal or the subsequent digital correction work. Number 6. The Toecutter gang's bikes inspired a customization movement that still exists. The visual language established by the Toecutter gang's motorcycle customization in the original Mad Max generated a documentable influence on the Australian custom motorcycle community that persisted well beyond the film's release period and continues producing identifiable work today. Within 2 years of the original Mad Max's 1979 release, Melbourne and Sydney custom builders were producing bikes carrying specific design elements traceable directly to the Toecutter fleet's aesthetic. The extended front ends, brutal blacked-out finishes, and deliberately menacing accessory choices that the film's Melbourne-based builder had developed became reference points that successive generations of Australian builders incorporated into their own work. The customization approach eventually crossed into international markets through magazine coverage during the 1980s, spreading the aesthetic beyond its Australian origins, without the international audience always recognizing the Mad Max connection. Specialist motorcycle historians tracing the lineage of certain contemporary custom building trends have identified the Toecutter bikes as an originating influence that the builders themselves sometimes remain unaware of. Number 5. Mad Max. Beyond Thunderdome's bike, sequences were considered too dangerous by 2 stunt coordinators. The motorcycle sequences developed for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in 1985 passed through the assessment of 2 separate stunt coordinators before finding one willing to sign off on them as design. The first coordinator reviewed the proposed sequences during pre-production and declined the assignment, citing specific combinations of speed, terrain, and performer proximity that he calculated exceeded acceptable risk parameters for the available budget's safety provision. A second coordinator was engaged and reached essentially the same conclusion about the most extreme sequences, negotiating significant design modifications before accepting the assignment. The modifications reduced the visual ambition of several sequences while maintaining their narrative function. George Miller accepted the compromises reluctantly, recognizing that the alternative was either finding a third coordinator willing to accept unmodified sequences or abandoning the material entirely. The finished sequences represent the coordinator's modified versions, rather than Miller's original intentions. The original unmodified sequence designs exist in production documentation, but have never been publicly described in detail. Number 4. The franchise's bikes influenced military vehicle design in one documented case.
Remembered as a conflict dominated by tanks, aircraft, and
the visual engineering language developed for Mad Max's motorcycle fleet generated an influence that extended well beyond the film and custom building communities into a documented case of military vehicle design. An Australian defense contractor working on light reconnaissance vehicle concepts during the 1980s included Mad Max franchise vehicle imagery in a moodboard collection submitted to the Defense Department as part of the design brief exploration for a proposed motorcycle-based reconnaissance unit. The contractor's internal documentation, portions of which became accessible through a Freedom of Information process decades later, explicitly referenced the Mad Max films as examples of how aggressive functionality and visual intimidation could be combined in a 2-wheeled military platform. The reconnaissance unit concept was ultimately not developed further. However, the documentation established a verifiable instance of a Hollywood franchise's vehicle design philosophy entering a formal military procurement design process. George Miller was reportedly informed of this connection years after it occurred, and described his reaction as somewhere between flattered and deeply concerned. Number 3, a Fury Road. Bike sold at auction, contained a hidden fabrication signature. When one of the principal Mad Max Fury Road motorcycle props reached public auction following the film's production conclusion, the winning bidder's subsequent detailed examination of the bike revealed something that Colin Gibson's fabrication team had embedded within the construction without disclosing it in any production documentation. Concealed within a non-structural interior cavity of the frame assembly was a small metal plate bearing the individual signatures of every member of the fabrication team who had worked on that specific bike. The plate was not accessible without partial disassembly and would never have been found by anyone not specifically searching for it. Gibson's team had apparently followed a long craft tradition of artisans signing their hidden work, applying it to a film production context without informing the production company, the director, or the props department. The auction house confirmed the discovery after the sale concluded. The buyer has described it as transforming the bike from a significant piece of film memorabilia into something considerably more personal and irreplaceable. Number 2. The original Mad Max budget was so limited that one bike appeared in every gang. The original Mad Max Productions motorcycle budget was constrained to a degree that required one specific bike to appear across multiple different gang and faction sequences through a series of cosmetic changes performed between filming blocks. The transportation coordinator developed a rapid modification system, allowing the bike's visual appearance to be altered sufficiently between sequences that continuity supervisors calculated audiences would not connect the same machine to different on-screen groups. Color changes were achieved through removable treatments rather than repainting. Accessory swaps modified the profile. Different camera angles and surrounding vehicles further obscured the repetition. The system worked effectively enough that the duplicated appearances went completely unnoticed during the film's original release. They remained undetected until the home video era gave viewers the ability to examine specific frames repeatedly. Fan analysis conducted during the 1990s eventually identified the repeated bike through a distinctive frame weld, visible in close examination of high-quality transfers. The discovery prompted considerable online discussion about how much of the original film's apparent fleet diversity was constructed through similar budgetary creativity. Number 1. The last original Mad Max. Bike verified as genuine has never been publicly displayed. Of all the motorcycles connected to the original Mad Max trilogy, the single unit whose provenance has been most comprehensively verified through continuous documented chain of custody from production to present day has never appeared at any public exhibition, fan event, or museum display. Its owner, a private collector who acquired it through a direct purchase from a former production crew member in the early 1990s, has maintained a consistent policy of refusing every public display request received across more than 3 decades of ownership. The collector's reasoning, expressed in a single written statement, released through an intermediary in 2008, was that the bike's preservation was better served by controlled private storage than by the environmental and handling risks associated with public exhibition. Authentication documentation held by the collector is considered by franchise historians as the most complete provenance record attached to any vehicle from the original trilogy. The Harley-Davidson Museum, the Australian National Motor Museum, and the National Film and Sound Archive have each made formal acquisition approaches. All were declined. The most thoroughly verified surviving motorcycle from one of cinema's most influential franchises exists in a temperature-controlled private facility, whose location remains undisclosed. And there you have it. 20 genuinely extraordinary secrets hidden within the most anarchic motorcycle fleet in cinema history. Mad Max's Wasteland bikes were never simply props. They were salvaged police vehicles, pre-war engines, engineered ruins, and accidental cultural monuments built by people with almost no money and absolutely no limits. Share this with every petrolhead and franchise obsessive you know.